Hey everyone, welcome to Creating the Comic Addendum Edition. So we have another great interview following up on episode 3 in which I talk about editing. This week is with Michael J Florio, and this is a wide-ranging discussion. We go over a lot of things, not only editing. It was great. We talked about a lot of different things. Could have gone on even longer, and I hope to have him on the podcast soon. So without further ado, check out my interview with Michael J Florio. Hey everyone, so I'm here with Michael J Florio. He's an editor, a writer, a jack of all trades, as it would seem, and we're going to get into all of that. So, Michael, thank you for being on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess whenever I have an interview for any of these shows, the first question is just a little bit about your own kind of origin story. First, as a comic book fan, how you came into it, because I find that there's some people who come into it very early at a young age, some people who start in older years, some who are mixed. But what's your kind of origin story as far as like your entry into comic books as a fan?
That's a real good question. So I'll start with the origin story because it's kind of funny. And it actually started with rock and roll.
Okay.
So my parents separated at 3, and my mom got together with my sister's father, and he spent my entire childhood trying to be a rock star. So I remember going to late night shows at coffee or cafes and bars when they couldn't find sitters. They also used to record with Three Doors Down here in Gulfport before they got really big. So I remember playing in like rented closed studios with like boxes and old store clothes hangers and like gymnastics and stuff with their kids, and then growing up around music. And then we moved to Vegas, and then when we got to Vegas, they switched the brand name from Special Ed to some other Tenacious D. That's what they called themselves. And he had this friend who for some reason did reconstruction work and always came home with like a box full of shit. And it was like cool shit for kids, like big toys. Or I remember one time he came home and it was literally just chock full of Sega. It was a Sega, 4 controllers and like 80 something games. And it was like, have fun. And he did the same thing with a box of comics one day. And I remember going through the stack, and the thing that stuck out to me the most was this silver and gold platinum foil cover of Silver Surfer. And that was my first comics experience, was Marvel Comics. And I'm kind of biased towards Marvel. I'm not a fan of the direction that big publishers are taking these days. There are some publishers who are doing really good with stories and kind of leaving the politics out of it. But I was really immersed in the Silver Surfer comic. It was the first time I'd ever really been exposed to science fiction of that caliber. And ever since then, I've just kind of been obsessed with character creation. And so I gravitated towards action figures. And then I wrote these just illustrious crossover stories with action figures. Like my stepdad had built this desk out of a door and some fencing posts in my room, and he made an L-shaped desk. This desk was huge. I mean, imagine a regular sized door, right? The width of it. That was my desk all the way around the room. I had a bed on the other side. But it's because I had so many toys. I was writing these illustrious stories that I would leave them, kind of like D&D gamers leave their stories in motion for the next game session. And I wish I had a storytelling journal, because man, they were so just
Thanks for listening.
Immersive.
If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, leave a review. We can be found on all social media platforms at portable_hole.
Discovery of comics led to.
We can be found on all podcast platforms at Portable
and that's
Hole
also
Publishing.
where I learned to read.
We can be found on the web at portableholepublishing.com, and you can email us at portableholepub@gmail.com.
In the essence of storytelling, it's kind of the origins or the antithesis of me growing up to become what I am now, which is one thing that I am now, which is comic book editor. So it's a very interesting story.
No, okay, so there's I know that most of the interview is going to be focused on comics and editing, but I'd love to know more about like how did you get into writing professionally, and what was your background in writing? Like so obviously you kind of we have the origin and the passion, but what I guess at what point did you feel you're like I can do this and do this for some money, and also at what point what is your background as far as just writing?
I think lots of people in my position would like to say that they came from, a great home where their, parents supported them. And I didn't have the validation and love per se that most kids experience, or that some kids experience growing up. pursuing their goals. And stuck up until my 30s, I didn't honestly know what I wanted to do with my life. Even I'm still kind of teetering on which medium that I feel strongest in, because, like you said, I'm a jack of all trades. Because my degrees basically have trained us, or have taught us, the in and outs of writing and editing in every single medium, from marketing to film and into comic books, and even transmedia, which is a combination of a multitude of medias to tell a story. Think of social media meets storytelling. That's what transmedia is,
Oh,
basically. When you engage with a TikTok, and that TikTok's connected to a part, one of four, and it also links to something on their Twitter, and then you go to their Instagram, and then they hit you with ads and all this. That's transmedia.
mm,
That might be transmedia marketing, but it's transmedia storytelling, because they're using multiple um, multiple elements of online storytelling and components to tell you a story, and it gets you engaged, which is the point of storytelling.
yeah.
Um, so you know, I was 14, and I was sitting in probably one of the most useless classes in Southern education, which was safety, hunting and boating safety,
Okay.
which is basically you watching a video and your teacher gives you the answers to the test, and you get these cool little cards that, I don't know, the state recognize you as someone who can safely handle a gun while
Okay.
hunting and also driving a boat at 15, right? And I didn't even have a learner's permit. So I spent the time creating this story. It's a fantasy story, still very vivid. Is the first story I ever wrote, was 14 pages. It was part of something larger, but at the time I wasn't equipped with the knowledge to continue a story further than, well, here we go. So I was pantsing this fantasy story, and it was called the Armor of Valadaria, and it was about a king who usurped a kingdom, and he was from an ethereal realm, and there was a chosen daughter, and she was whisked away, by her uncle, and taken to this, secret thing in the woods. Kind of sounds like Snow White meets Lord of the Rings. And then there's a prophecy that she's got to find all these different armor sets that her father had, because the guy who took it over had just taken these armor bits and just like spread them across the continent. Right? If you ever heard the stories of the guy in Africa who was supposedly Jesus, and that powers that be like spread his body parts throughout the world, and then he like reassembled himself and came into like great power. That was kind of that concept.
Mm,
And so she needed the armor, and then the idea was she would find the armor, and that would span over like 3 books or 3 stories, because I was very into Aragon. Christopher Paolini was a big inspiration early on when I was reading books. Not Harry Potter. Aragon was way more dynamic and creative, because he created, basically his own language and stuff. Um, but yeah, that was the first time I experienced writing. I'd stopped reading comic books at that time. My youth and early teenage years was really taken up by experiencing life itself, through various jobs and, friendships, and obviously different types of love dynamics,
yeah.
and failed relationships and non-failed relationships. I moved around a lot. I was couch hopping, basically what people do when they don't go to college and finish high school, trying to find themselves in life.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about 2015, after my first divorce, that I moved, and I was closing the book on this relationship that has been playing peekaboo with me for a long, long time. And then I discovered that after that relationship failed, that I needed to do something for me. And
Mm,
so I didn't know what that was. I didn't want to go to college, because I had so many friends who went to college, and they weren't finding jobs unless they were in industries that really needed you. So like nurses, lawyers, everybody else who went to school for something creative had fell into marketing or retail and fast food chains and upper management or restaurants. And I was just like, well, you could just do that anyway. I was setting mobile homes, and I was escort driving for a company in Louisiana. And I was just like, well, if I'm going to do something real with my life, it needs to be something that I love. And I've spent the last 25, 30 years at that point playing video games. So it was like game design.
mm,
Spoke to someone at Full Sail, got fast tracked. I did that for about a year. I learned how to write for games. I learned how to create assets. Worked in Maya and did a bunch of stuff with some of the game systems like UE4. and I made Pong from scratch. That was pretty
Okay.
cool, and that was the last big thing I did. But it wasn't until my grandma had died and that I started doing research on like how she could cure cancer herself that I realized that there's a huge there's a huge fallout between what's real and what's not. And so at that point in time, I didn't realize it was a political switch, but I made a decision to transfer into writing, and so that's when I transferred into the bachelor's degree program at Full Sail, creative writing for entertainment.
Okay.
They no longer offer the master's degree program. They have this new thing called FC3, which is basically a pay as you go type of learning, which I thought was cool. I wish they had that when I was available, or when I was going to school, because that'd have been cheaper on me. But right after the bachelor's, I finished my master's, and once I had finished that, I had a few scripts. I had 6 short film scripts, and then I had started a book, 3 books actually. Um, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do because they train you in all these different mediums.
Yeah.
And then you think you know what you're going to do, and then all of a sudden life just kind of shows you what you're made of. And so when COVID came along, when I finished my master's degree or when I finished my bachelor's in 2019, I was just like, well, crap. So I had to continue working. We couldn't move anywhere. States were shut down. I ended up losing my job at this time, and I had already started the master's program. So I decided to focus, and I finished that. And so then I was faced with, my next big obstacle outside of choosing to be a writer after not writing for so long was, how the hell do I find industry where I'm at? Because I'm located in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of industry down here.
Yeah.
There's blue collar working people down here. They run tracos, backos, and 4-wheelers all over the place. I mean, if you want to work down here, you're looking at hotels, casinos, restaurants. I mean, the Uber scene's kind of big,
Yeah.
but I don't prefer that because it's just not safe. I don't agree with the business model.
Mm.
um, and then there was the military, which of course I've always had weight issues, so that was never an option. So I had to continue finding. So I went into an internship program, which I found through a website that gives you access to job boards
Mhm.
based out of all the different locations where they have industry. And I picked up my first internship, Smart Media LLC, which is run by Nicholas Tana, who has a comic book coming out that I had the pleasure of working on, and consulting and narrative and helping it get put together. And it's called E-Junkie. It's being published by Simon and Schuster and Scout Comics. First, I believe it just actually came out not too long ago. But that was kind of my first industry experience. I got to read a bunch of scripts. I got to make notations. I got to feel kind of what it's like to be on a team and inside that. And I made that opportunity happen by going out there and looking at it.
Yeah.
And then I had to continue that. So I finally got picked up in the comics industry by this gentleman that I had been following since 2017. His name was Anthony Moore. It was a small press company called Limitless Comics. And I guess he was following me on Facebook, saw what I was posting, and decided to offer me my first editing job. That editing job is actually really profound because Karen Sadie Darbo, who co-created Blade's daughter for Marvel this past year, was one of the cover artists on that project.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so cool. Um, so that was my first job in comics industry, was independent comics. And then after that, I kind of fell back in love with comics. I started reading comics again. I started going to my local comic shops and kind of rediscovering this passion. And so that's when I decided that comics was the medium that I was gonna be the mainstay of, because as my internship went on for about 8 months, there was a period of time where I wasn't putting in as much effort because I was doing all this other stuff and I was trying to figure it out. And Nicholas had called me. It was just like, hey man, like, is everything okay? What's going on? And we kind of had a conversation about what had been going on with me personally and then professionally. And he just gave me some advice, industry advice. And that was, if you're going to do this for real, you have to learn how to juggle. But before you can do that, you have to master it is what you want to do first.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart really, really, really seriously. So I just stuck with comics. Like all my big plans for moving to LA or New York and pursuing a career in screenwriting, writing for television and writing movies, which was originally something that I wanted to do. After COVID, the political scene just kind of changed those states, and I don't know what happened to the economy, but rent is just God, it's so high.
Really?
Yeah,
It's
like
happening
rent.
everywhere because it's like it's same in New York. There was a small period where it was like really low, and then in
And then
like
it
the last
jumped
year
right
and a
up,
half,
right?
it's been crazy.
It's crazy when you look at stuff in LA, the cheapest you can find is 18, and that's not even in a great area.
Yeah,
I mean, when you start looking at the crime ratios, and because of COVID and the lockdowns and stuff, all that stuff went up.
yeah.
So it was just like I got a family, like I'm a father of four.
Okay.
My son lives with me. I have three kids with my ex-wife who I get every other weekend. So I'm a father. I can't miss any of their life. I can't bring
Yeah,
him into a dangerous situation. If I'm not gonna be able to make enough money where I'm at doing what I love so that I can bring my kids to me during the summer when I want to see them, to make the career work, then
yeah,
I'd end up being unhappy.
yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
I just kind of run that simulated in my head, and I was just like, I got to bring industry to me.
Yeah,
And it's worked out. It's been hard. You stay diligent, but since then I've joined the Comic Books Editors Alliance, which is on Facebook.
yeah,
Great group of
yeah,
folks. It's run by Steve Cooley. A bunch of other great people are in there. Rick Arthur, people who've worked in there for Marvel and DC, and people who are current editors for companies like Mad Cave Studios, Dark Horse, and all the other small presses out there as well. They're a part of those groups. So that was a way to connect in the industry. I ended up furthering my education by taking comics experience courses
mhm,
through comicsexperience.com. It's ran by Andy Schmidt. For those of you who don't know, he wrote Crisis on Infinite Earths and the Transformers video game that came out a while back, and he started that comics experience a long time ago, right after he left DC, and he was kind of faced with the same thing. Like I have a family now, like I can't just be flying off to LA and New York all the time,
yeah,
and he's based out of Kentucky. But I took the Intro for Writings course, and so I learned a lot about writing and editing from him. And then I took a Jim Higgins course, and he was an editor, a featured editor at DC, and we did one-on-one Zoom sessions with him, and that increased my pedigree. And it wasn't until I started my own podcast that I really got an inside look at comics as a business,
yeah,
and that's when I got picked up by Inked Marketing, or Inked Studios LLC. And what I do for them is basically what I do for comics creators, which is we go through crowdfunding platforms of independent comic creators that are looking to get into comics but don't really have the business savvy, that the business etiquette that they need to thrive in the marketplace. And we help them crowdfund their book to maximize like visibility and profit so they can get the most out of it so they can continue to do it, because comics is a DIY medium,
yeah,
and it's been going down the last couple years, even though it had spikes up during the COVID shutdowns, because people were at home more often, they had more money, and
yeah,
they didn't have nothing to do, so they were reading comic books.
yeah,
Kickstarter blew up and all that. So that's basically my background and my
yeah,
pedigree. The things I'm working on now are all small press. What I hope to accomplish is publish through a few traditional outlets, and then start actually regularly going to shows, because it's not until you actually go to Comic Cons and small shows that you really start to network. And building your network is viably important to your
yeah,
business.
yeah,
That's how I picked up Austin St. John as a client for our company. Was I met him in St. Tammany. Great guy. He's got a comic book coming out. It's called Redemption 2. It's on Kickstarter. The pre-launch is on Kickstarter now, but I would have never made that connection had I never gone to a show and had the courage to show up and geek out and talk to people, see what their goals are. And it gives you an idea to it gives you a live simulation to kind of study the marketplace, find out what's going on. It kind of tells you what stories are popular today. So if you're like you're writing something, like I started writing Wildoni in 2020. It's about to drop on Kickstarter. And what I've noticed in the last 2 years, that Japanese stuff has been getting super popular. I mean, you got TMNT, The Last Ronin coming
Yeah.
out. Frank Miller announced the return of his Ronin series. There's a bunch of independent writers who had released previous Ronin books. If you do a Google search of Wildoni, and like nobody has that name, so good SEO on me.
Mm.
And then I got a bunch of independent people with small press who has published a bunch of independent Wildoni, and or not Wildoni, but a bunch of different types of supernatural stories surrounding samurais and onis and oni hunting, and like Jean-Paul de Jong's book through, I think it's Blackberry Comics. He has a big one. So that's basically the background, and kind of how I came into writing comics and my journey from since leaving school, and what I've had to overcome. I'd like to say that I had that support and stuff, but I had to figure it out because the deaths in my family kind of were super big obstacles in my writing journey, and nobody out there talks about how detriment your personal position in life, how it affects your creative journey, because creatively you're pulling giant worlds and you're creating characters. It is a very exhaustive process
Yeah.
to expend all this brain power and all these synapses and expenditure of all your like nerve endings to put into your hand while you're thinking about all these different intricate and dynamic ways to tell a story, use characters. You're killing people. When you kill someone in your story, you kind of feel that pain because you're
Yeah.
drawing pain from real life or real life situations. And while other people treats it as escapism, there's some grounded truth in these stories that people tell, even when it is escapism, because you have to experience something in the story. And the only way to do that is the way that you see people portraying characters in television and movies, and that is you have to draw from an experience to raise that emotion to the surface. If you want people to cry during the scene, you got to tell us why it's so important beforehand, and then when you build up to that scene, that's when the tears roll in. If the tears don't roll in, then you didn't do a good job of building up those events to
Yeah.
that one moment. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, so that's a lot of great stuff. Like there's several spots where, like I gotta ask follow up on that, and then oh, I know I gotta ask follow up on that. But no, I think you do bring a really good point about, I think some of the creative process, and I think why good or bad, like a lot of times like tragedy, um uh, it's I guess food for writing, because you can really pull from emotions that
Yeah.
it's hard, it's a little bit harder to fake that. Not that you can't, but I even think myself, like of some of the things that I think there were a couple stories that I've had, like kind of that that when I sat down and really thought about it, it's like, oh, this is really tied to this childhood experience, or this tragedy that I went through. And that's why, part why it's so strong, I guess, in certain ways, but also like where you can draw from that. And I think it is harder, maybe, if you don't have some struggles or hardships sometimes to pull that. Not again, not that you can't, but no,
Right.
it's really interesting. So now I guess when it comes to editing for you, like, were you just kind of thrown into it, or did you, because like did you have a mind of when you were doing your internship, like, okay, this is the area, or did it kind of fall in your lap?
Um, the editing job itself, it did fall in my lap,
Yeah.
but I don't feel that way per se, because I did. I mean, there was a prerequisite to, I guess, that happening. So one was I followed this guy's work for several years. I had several conversations with him over time. And I had backed a lot of his projects, and I had shared his social media posts. There was, I guess, a lot of sense of appreciation. And then I guess when you notice someone is getting into the medium, and you're looking to increase your hand as a small press company, you want to find people who have the tools, who can elevate either your business or your product.
Yeah.
And so I guess him following, me posting all my accolades, like, winning visual advance 2 2 class storytelling. I made I think it was a 1 minute and 6 second stop motion film, which I did all the VO for. I printed out 8x10 photos of like the front of my mom's porch. I used an Electra and a Namor action figure to illustrate the story, and then I edited it all together, and that was basically one of my capstone projects. And then before that, I had one. I was awarded the comedy and tragedy for some of the scripts that I had written in that first year in my bachelor's degree program, which I didn't expect on winning anything. I've always been one of those people who are like, I don't win nothing. I just show up and do stuff. Like, so I was super happy. But posting that type of experience and then posting the, hey, look at this, and then talking about the industry, and I guess that caught his attention, and he just kind of threw that first job in my lap, and that was kind of where I got. Now the internship, that's something I looked for.
Okay, yeah.
But it really started thanks to Bethany Thanos. You can laugh at that name. That's a real last name. Like, she was the best teacher ever. She was an instructor at Full Sail, still is. I had the pleasure of guest speaking one of her classes this past year, or I believe it was last fall. But she had pointed out to me, because we have assignments at Full Sail where the Full Sail class becomes the teachers for certain projects. And what I mean by that is that everybody's given the same project, and then either certain people are chosen, or the entire class gets an opportunity to give you feedback as if they were the instructor. It is a open, critical thinking and positive criticism exercise that is positively promoted at the school and is part of their core curriculum for the positive feedback pyramid. It is super awesome. It's very helpful, and it allowed me to look through the creative lens of other students and give them real, honest analysis. And analysis and research have been a skill of mine, I guess, since I was a kid, because I would look at things and I would observe it, I would analyze it, and I would ask questions, and I would internalize all of this. Like, nobody knew that I was observing, watching, and analyzing. Nobody has to become an expert with a piece of paper to become an expert. If you expose yourself to 100 hours sitting in a courtroom, listening to lawyers go back and forth, eventually you're going to learn something about those cases. And once you know enough, you don't have to take a bar to be a good lawyer. You just have to know what it is that lawyers do that make them good lawyers. You know what I'm saying? We can reference the show Suits if you want to, as an example, because he just like portrayed a really good frontal lobe memorization, like a superpower in a comic book. But not everybody could do that. And so she pointed out to me, because these posts are supposed to be short and concise, but mine were always long and very informative, and it tackled multiple analysis from various angles. And she just like, have you ever thought about becoming a developmental editor? And that's the first time I ever heard the term, because I've always heard the term editor, right? That's all anybody ever hears. They don't tell you about assistant editors. They don't tell you about group editors. They don't tell you about developmental editors. They don't tell you about proofreading editors. They don't tell you about line editing. All those are different. They're all different. Line editing is super subjective and very critical. You have to read every word, every letter, line by line by line by line. But while you're doing that, you also have to look at associations and patterns. Eventually, if you stare at someone's writing long enough, you'll find the words that they use the most, and you'll make notes based on that, because that's just it's redundant language. Developmental editing is basically chopping everything up and putting it back together and suggesting it go together in a way that tells a dynamic and thorough story that leaves no stone unturned as far as arcing goes. So it could be a story that starts at the end and you have to walk it back and explain how it got there. That's a very popular way to tell stories these days. It really depends, because those are also obscured ways. And so what you're writing for is the information in the story. So that was kind of the beginning of the journey. And then I started looking into developmental editing and then what people get paid. And you'll probably ask this question, and we'll get into that when you do, but not a lot of people want to pay for that type of editing.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why when you get to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the where it really started as far as being an editor. She turned me on to it because she saw that my potential in my analytical skills were there to be that.
So now when it comes to, I guess when you're looking at new writers, or new, what are some errors that you see right off the bat, or some common things that you see, not even errors, but what are some things that you do see coming from especially new writers that you find you have to spend a lot of time on as an editor?
Detail. Just
Too
the other
much or
day,
too little?
sometimes it could be both.
Yeah.
Just enough detail is what you want to be in.
Yeah.
Too much detail might confuse an artist.
Yeah.
In independent comics, what's different between independent comics mainly and mainstream comics is that independent comics deals with a plethora of language barriers. And so when you present artists from Croatia, India, South America, or even parts of Eastern Asia, like the islands, Malaysia, I think that's where one of the artists that I was working for a while back, or who I was working for a writer on, was from. There's a language barrier there, so you can't put too much intricacy into those panels as dynamic as you want them to be. For writers, especially for me in the beginning, over over detailistic panel action descriptions were my weak point. You can't control the narrative so much that you completely take the creative process away from away from the artists. They have to have their own adaptive input, because if they don't, then artists become lazy because they don't become excited for the story anymore. And then once they get to that point, communication starts to break down. When communication starts to break down, the project is dead. Because I mean, especially for those who don't choose to have an editor, because you have no mediator there to mend fences.
Yeah.
And once that happens, you've lost money. You have to find a new artist. You might have the same problems if you don't realize that the problem is in fact you. And it's not a negative thing. It's not. I don't mean it to be a negative connotation. But writers who are just breaking into the industry aren't aware of those types of mistakes, unless their idol breaks into their front door and be like, yeah, that's real. That's a real thing. You need to pay attention to that. And that hardly ever happens, because we treat idols like, everybody treats their idol when they meet them for the first time like they're sitting on some type of pedestal.
Yeah.
But they're really just people like you and me.
Yeah.
No, so it's really hard. I find that first writers tell good stories, but they're over detailistic.
Yeah.
Too many panels on a page. That's a big one.
Yeah.
The ideal page panel length on one page, if you're focusing on action specifically, is 4 to 6, maybe pushing 7. If you're doing a double page layout, you can tell a really big action scene even with fewer than 6 panels.
Yeah.
Because you could still tell a story, but you also want them to see the action.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an Alan Moore and put 12 panels on one page to show us opening a door, right?
Yeah.
That's always been the biggest example. That was the biggest example used when I was in college, was Alan Moore's depiction of Rorschach opening a door. And you see him standing in front of the door, then we see the door, and then we see his hand reach out, and then his hand gets closer, and then he finally gets on the door, he turns it, and he finally walks inside. It's like that type of writing is suspense writing. He's building up to a point.
Yeah.
But writers don't know how to disseminate those types of panel usages to tell that story.
Yeah.
And in those situations, you can tell artists that's exactly how you want it to look. But the reality is that whatever you turn in as far as script goes, your artist is ultimately going to have something slightly different.
Yeah.
And on occasion, your artist might agree with your entire page layout and give you a layout that's exactly what you wanted. And
Yeah.
kudos when that happens. I love it when that happens, but it's not always the case.
Yeah.
Narratively wise, I see a lot of passive character usage. And what I mean by that is the surrounding landscape that the character lives in, whether it's in Italy in 1818 or in Greece in 460 AD or 10,000 years ago in North America as a native, uh, even as a kaiju in 2050 Japan, things happen to the character and the character has to react. Well, what does the character want? Well, he's got to survive. I'm like, that's not a story. That's entertaining.
Yeah.
But I can go get that at a comedy house.
Yeah.
Especially in New York, when they're like asking the people in the audience, give us a setting, like give us a situation.
Yeah.
Like they're passively giving you entertainment because you're the one controlling it. You're the writer, you control the narrative. Your character needs to have a want, there needs to be an obstacle, there has to be a goal. You have to know if he's going to get it or not.
Yeah.
And you can just totally take it away from him.
Yeah.
You can kill him at the end, do what you want, but it has to be him making those choices, not him making choices to things happening to him.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a story, the combination of passive and active character play along really nice, so that creates something really beautiful because the character can't always be in control of his actions. However, it was always embedded into me that the greatest stories told are the ones that the characters, like the problems that the characters start themselves. And if you read Spider-Man, Spider-Man is a perfect example of what that means, because a majority of the time, Spider-Man has created most of his villains.
Mhm.
If when he's not being a villain to himself and standing in his own way, I mean, the Sandman was a really good example. They tried to use that in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man series, but it ended up backfiring up until the third Spider-Man and the new Tom Holland series, where they kind of brought him back. And it's like, yeah, I would have never been the Sandman if I didn't kill your uncle and you didn't try to chase me down and blah, blah, blah. The professor, both professors, the Lizard Man and Doc Ock, I mean, those were all people that Spider-Man helped.
Yeah.
I mean, just to some degree, your characters have to feel real.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I see in independent comics is that during character creation, that's the main focus.
Yeah.
And then like you'll see these settings and there's no authenticity to the background of it.
Yeah.
Unless you're writing in a manga style, manga doesn't focus on settings. They're all emotion. They function on 4 acts, not 3. Western writing focuses only on 3 acts as far as story goes. And so they don't really care much about setting. And it's only important, it's setting is used to mark like story points.
Yeah.
When you get to a certain part of the character arc, because most of manga writing is character writing. It's character driven storytelling. And that's why it succeeds so much than Western storytelling. It's a conversation for a different day, but that's just my analysis of it. If you ever read, oh my goodness, Battle Angel, Alita Battle Angel, originally just called Battle Angel.
Yeah.
If you ever read that comic, you notice that in the action scenes, there's not a whole lot of surrounding going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and when characters and character heads are screaming at each other, it's usually just like very white, vibrant backgrounds with lots of different types of text effects or different SFX or maybe some motion graphics in there, like hash marks that, big fist coming towards you. So the air is kind of like, you can see the air around it building up and swishes it. They want you to focus on the action. That's intentional.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times I see Western comics, they go all in with scenery, and that's super hard to do in a script because you have to be so detailed. And the way that people used to write comic scripts back in the day, because they had libraries and not the internet, they had to be that detailistic, and so they had to put in like cutouts in here and newspaper clippings if they could find them, magazine clippings.
Mhm.
If you've ever watched a comic documentary, they talk about it. It sucked. It sucked. Nowadays, I personally use hyperlinks for everything,
Mhm.
and Pinterest is my number one go-to source for like,
Okay.
hey, I kind of want it to look like this or look like that,
Yeah.
because Pinterest is just a plethora of
Yeah.
creative, like it's a huge creative pool that you could just dive into.
Yeah.
But that those are the mainstay mistakes I see. The biggest
Yeah.
one though, for comics, is really dialogue.
Yeah.
Dialogue, not more than really 240, 260 words per page.
Yeah.
About 20 to 25 words per balloon. Like you've seen examples where there's more, and there are, rules that you can break, but you got to know the rules first.
Yeah.
So you don't want your stories to be so overly complicated that words take up the art, because
Yeah.
you want a balance between story and art.
Yeah.
That's how you get nominated for Ringo Awards, other than, having been in the industry long enough that everybody loves you.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a political thing,
Yeah.
right? But if you do have that good balance of words and images, because it's not such a feat of accomplishment to read the story, and it's also not such an annoyance to look at the page.
Yeah.
I read comics twice. I read them first for the story. I see the art, but I'm not seeing the art.
Yeah.
I'm reading the story. If something in the story stands out about something in the image, I'll look at it, and then I'll go
Yeah.
back and then I'll enjoy the art,
Yeah.
because I don't want the burden of having to worry about the narrative and what's going on. I want to see on the page. Like
Yeah.
I want to enjoy the art.
Yeah.
So I read comics twice.
Yeah.
It sounds like a headache, but you
No,
stress it. It's like really, really nice.
no, it's funny. You mentioned that I was on a flight a couple few weeks ago, and that's exactly what I did. Like I started reading, and I find that I always do that when I read comics, is I tend to really focus on the words and not focus on the art. And I kind of did that. I was like, okay, I went through it once, and then I was like, all right, well, got a couple hours left. Let me go through this again and really appreciate the art now that I know, I know what the story is. But yeah, you brought some great points there. Like the one of the best things I've ever heard as far as that helped my writing was like, what does the character want? Like it's such an important question. I think it made my writing that much better. And I think I found that there are secondary and tertiary characters that became more alive because they had a want. And so when I was writing for them, I'm writing for that. Even if they don't get that much time or that much dialogue, you're writing with that in mind. And so it fleshes out characters and makes things much more like three-dimensional.
Absolutely.
And it's funny that also mentioning that made me realize, 'cause I saw Oppenheimer this weekend and I was trying to figure out what was I like. It was a great movie, it's like done by a master, but there were some things I didn't love about the pacing, and I think that's what it was. Have you seen it yet?
I have not, but
Okay.
I've known enough about the
Yeah.
history to know
So
how much of an asshole that guy was for creating it.
so the first third of the movie was that like you didn't know what he wanted. There wasn't a direction, and so it felt like it was meandering along. It was just like, okay, here's this guy's life. All right, we're seeing him do this and we're seeing him do that, and it's not until certain things happen that which happen way later than it typically would, that there's an actual movie there. But a lot of it is that it's like he doesn't like, we don't know what he wants. There is no direction. It's just happening, and I think some of it was there were artistic decisions there, but then it felt like a story that wasn't quite like there wasn't a narrative until like a solid third into a 3-hour movie.
Was there any voiceover?
Not really. Not that no, not that I
Okay.
recall.
Yeah,
A lot of flashbacks.
it was probably, yeah, so it was exposition is okay. You see this in comics too.
Yeah.
One of the biggest art edits that I had made suggestions on in a new book that I've been working on with artist LM Johnson. He's the creator of Sweet Pea. Was he had this beautiful like flashback scene,
Mhm.
and it was grayscale. And then I looked at it for a moment and I was like, I wonder if we put a different tone in the flashback. No, it wasn't grayscale. It was what's that? Man, what's that? It's like a golden auburn color.
Like
Was
sepia or something like
Yeah,
that?
like
Sepia or
yeah,
yeah,
sepia.
sepia. Yeah.
So it was this beautiful sepia flashback. And I was like, what if at the end of the flashback, some of the color starts to come out
Mm.
just in places where we want the art, where we want the reader to focus on.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I'll try that. And it's his favorite page.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And it's just from looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And it's just those little tiny things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't focus on exposition. Exposition is, it could be a monster. And that's where writers really just want to dump information
Yeah.
on people, because not because they want to, but because they're so excited about what they're writing
Yeah.
about. They feel as though they need to tell it. Like, they
Yeah.
gotta tell it now. That's the compulsory component in your brain, that when you meet someone who doesn't know how to shut their mouth, they just don't know how to control that part of their brain.
Yeah.
It's not really their fault. It's literally a part of the brain that wants to dump out all this information because it has
Yeah.
to. Like, the neurons are firing, it's ready to go, synapses, boom, and it
Yeah.
just comes out. And they have to, because if they don't, then it affects them neurologically and starts to increase, like hormones, like on a chemical level, like a biochemical level. It really screws with them physically. Um,
Yeah.
and so I find that writers have this issue too,
Yeah.
but that is what your secondary characters are for. When you play Skyrim and you go to Homestead for the first time before, or after the dragon scares you off, right before you go kick the dragon's ass and then get your ass kicked again, you go to that first town, right? The store goods guy, the armorer lady, the king's really weird elf looking bodyguard, they all have something to say. They all have exposition. If you don't know how to dump it in there, create a character that does.
Yeah.
It makes your landscape look robust
Yeah.
and engaging and alive. And if someone can feel like it's alive, then you have a good thing going in your narrative, where it's not like, look at all this exposition, look at all this exposition. If you look at
Yeah.
The Last Ronin, Mikey's flashback scenes take place split up in intricate parts of the story. Like, in part one, there's a little segment. In part two, I believe there's nothing in part two. But in part 3 and 4, when he finally explains to April and his daughter, or no, it's either April or her daughter, why or where he went after the explosion happened and killed his brothers, he went back to Japan. I didn't like the art flashback for that scene, but I understood where they paced it and why.
Yeah.
Because we know Mikey's suffering traumatically from the loss of his brothers. We know that he wants revenge. We know he's going to get it. What he doesn't know is that April's alive. What he doesn't know is that he has options for life, right?
Yeah.
Because at first, in the first half of the book, it's just, I'm sorry if you haven't read it and I'm spoiling shit for you.
It's, no, it's funny. I've had this stuff spoiled. I have it. It's like the next book I will read. I have it on my like desk as the next. It'll probably be my next flight. Like,
This is just a comparison and
yeah,
analysis.
I know
I'm not dropping any heavy
yeah, don't worry about
details.
that. Yeah. No worries.
But
Yeah.
so I'll just stop there. But if you look at it, the pacing, bringing it back around to what you were saying, the pacing, those flashbacks in the book were ideal to and confined to idle exposition, because when you become a storyteller is when you realize that you have the ability to introduce information where you want it to go.
Yeah.
Most people just write the first draft and they're like, good, send it.
Yeah.
We're like, no, writing is rewriting, my friend.
Yeah.
Come back here. Let's look at this again. Let's break this up here. Let's break this up here. If you want to know how shows like Scandal and Spartacus and Game of Thrones had those really meaty narrative plot points that pissed you off or made you just, oh, I cannot believe the imp just killed his dad on the toilet with a crossbow. It took hours for them to lay out the story, look at what needed to happen, and they planned for that to be there.
Yeah.
Just like a business plan plans to make this much money, they're implementing a strategy that's going to make them that much money. You need to treat your narratives the same way.
Yeah.
Beginning writers don't know how to do that. They're still learning, which is okay. That's why, the short story industry is so robust, because you have the opportunity to make small narratives, and
Yeah.
you can use those techniques, and that's what they are. They're techniques. They're story techniques. You're withholding information. You're suspending disbelief until you throw that information out there, and you let the reader or the audience who's watching think they know what they know until they don't.
Yeah.
And then you flip everything upside down and start again. Game of Thrones
Yeah.
was a great example of how they implemented the story, which is an unfair comparison because a lot of the stuff in the books didn't make it into the show,
Yeah.
especially after, I think, season 4 or
Yeah. I think
5.
it was season 4 with, yeah, I think it was 4 or 5. You're right. They're like, it completely shifted
Yeah,
from,
because he was still writing the books.
pretty much. Yeah.
So like, hey, we ran out of books, so
And by that point, they were kind of checked out, it seemed.
yeah, the Starbucks
Yeah.
coffee, we'll say no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's you're totally right. Pacing is a big thing.
Yeah.
And that comes, I guess you could segue this into getting a good editor,
Yeah. Well,
because
so that's going to be that's my next question. And it's kind of loaded. So you
let's
mentioned, and
go.
you mentioned the pay. So we're going to kind of, I want to touch on a few things. So first is, one is finding a good editor, right? So how do you go about finding an editor? But then the second thing is like, I guess, because I realized, like, very early on, right? Like, I didn't, when I was thinking about doing this whole process, like, I thought about an editor, but I didn't realize how much it would cost, but I also didn't realize how valuable it is.
Yeah.
So I guess just speak a little bit to, I guess, why it costs so much and just the amount of work that goes into it and why it is invaluable, even for like look, if you're doing like a small comic, your own thing, and you want to have it for family and friends, you don't need an editor necessarily.
Right.
But if you're trying to make something that's polished and professional, I'm sold, and I think it's really, really important. If you're going to run a Kickstarter, then build that into your campaign. Like, you should have an editor. So I guess maybe talk about, like, just the value of an editor and how to find one, and why is it worth, like, the cost that that can be substantial depending on how deep into the process the editor is.
So so let's tackle it from this perspective. And just comic books.
Yeah.
Finding an editor in comic books is super simple.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of groups out there. There are hundreds of people who have thousands of websites. You could even be so bold as to buy a comic book from your local comic store, and you could even target a small press book, look at who the editor is, find them on Twitter and social media, and then DM them. That's how easy it is. And if you show up with money, no one's going to turn you away.
Yeah.
It's just, what is the right amount, right?
Yeah.
Professionally speaking, and this is professional, I do not include independent comics because that is a rabbit hole we'll dive into in a second. Yeah. Professionally, I have a master's degree, which I need to stop sharing so much because I've been told it's getting me nowhere, and I've been overqualified for a lot. But professionally, the pricing is 25 to 50 an hour, or 100 and 150 per page. Yeah. Now that sounds excruciating and exorbitant to anybody looking to spend. But if you think about it, I believe Marvel and DC pay their editors somewhere in the lines of, and we're talking editor-in-chiefs, not assistant editors or group editors or part-time editors on a different level with a different title that I'm not sure exists or not. Just like their top editors, right? Make anywhere between 60 to 80,000 a year. Mm-hmm. But small press, even Scout, they don't pay that much. Yeah. They don't pay that much. There's no way. There's no way they pay that much. And even if they paid 40, I mean, that's great for them. But there are far more comic book editors outside of publishers than there are publishers, yeah. And that's a crazy number to consider.
Yeah.
You're like, Mike, how do you know? Well, I've spent almost 4 years in comics, enough to know that there may be over a couple hundred publishers in the United States that mainly focus on it. And you have to think there's one particular head honcho editor for every one of those. Yeah. Now, if we're gonna pull from numbers in independent comics, we're looking at 150 to 200 books per month.
Yeah.
Not all of them have editors, but if they did, You're talking about on a monthly basis, there are more editors working on books than there are in major and small press publishers in the entire country.
Mhm.
That is a crazy number. So, well, what if I can't afford that? Well, then you can do the next best thing and you become your own editor. The problem with that is that you're going to have to teach yourself what to look for, what not to look for. You're going to have to treat yourself like your own worst enemy,
Yeah.
especially when you go look at your script, which means you're going to have to understand how to crush confirmation bias within your own writing.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to learn how to proofread, which is the biggest thing for publishing, because no one wants to sit there and read misspelled words or words spelled backwards, or you're screwing with people's dyslexia at that point if you don't double check it before you go to publish. And then once you go to publish, if you've printed, you've just wasted money, and now you have to go fix it. If you've put your comic up on 13 different platforms where you can sell digitally, you have to go replace those EPUB or those PDF files
Yeah.
for digital download now, which costs you what? It costs you hours in work that you could be spending on a new project or collaborating or hiring someone else for the next big thing. Because if you're a comic book writer or creator, or you're running small press and independent comics, you can't spend any more or less time on any one thing than it takes away from getting to the next project. Like you work
Yeah.
on one book, you roll it out, you do the marketing, however you choose to go after that, then bam, then the next thing. You have to have something in the pipeline at all times, because you're not Marvel, you're not DC, you're not Dark Horse, you don't have marketing funds, you're not backed by Disney, your books aren't out in theaters or on HBO on streaming, right? So you're not getting any residuals. There's nothing coming in but whatever work you're putting out there. So if you can't afford those prices, which are exorbitant, because most good, decent artists cost $80 to $100 a page, and that's just art. Some of them offer, inking or grayscaling, and then some of them offer flatting and also color at $100 a page, which you can find, but is it going to be quality?
Yeah.
And also, as a creator, what people don't think about, which is what a good editor does, what style of art do you want presented in your story? Like what type of art style? If you go read a Rick and Morty comic, highly different from reading an Iron Man comic that Marvel's putting out.
Yeah.
The art isn't as detailistic. Color theory on Spectrum is way off, because Rick and Morty is an absurd, over grossly highly popular adult animation comic, and they tell different stories than they do in Iron Man, where it's more grounded in scientific theories and science fiction, and it has to have authenticity when talking about things that he creates or events that are happening, like some type of space propulsion system, like something of that nature. But it's money well spent, and it's because we look at your writing, we make sure that your script 100% ready to go. We make sure you're proofreading. I mean, once you get done with the script, two things happen. Your script is done for the artist. It can go off. You can start, well, actually three things happen. Once you're done with the script, you can start shopping for covers. Once you're done with the script, you can send it off to art to start getting concept pages in, roughs. We're talking just roughs, just basic circles, squares, shapes, and layouts. We don't want anything finalized yet. That's where we get in the lines, and then you do inking. And then you get to take all the dialogue, and then you get to make your lettering script. Most independent publishers don't use lettering scripts. They give the script to the letterer. But if you take all your panels and then just leave the dialogue in there, all your letterer has to do is copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. It makes their job so much easier.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't know that unless you hired a good editor.
Yeah.
A good editor keeps you on track. You have to believe in your deadline. If you don't believe in your deadline, you're not going to get there. You'll just be like, oh well, we can do it next week. No, you wanted it done now. We're doing it now. They're your timekeepers. They help you communicate with your team. If you have a troubleshooting issue, they help you get past that. Perfect example. I had a gentleman. We no longer work together. I finished his work though. I did 54 pages. It was in horrible shape. It wasn't proofread. It was already done. And the biggest mistake he made, and if he would have had a good editor from the start, he would have known this. Always get your files your hard copy files from your artist. If an artist is not willing to give you hard copy files for doing your project and charge you for them, that is not an artist you want to keep around. That is industry standard. And the reason I say that is, and this is before you get lettering pages back, because if you don't, if your letterer makes a mistake and you want to hire someone else and you don't have hard copy images with the finished pages without letters, you will have to do something excruciating. You'll have to find an artist who can also letter, and they're going to have to use Photoshop or some other software program and cut out all those letters in the finished pages, and they're going to have to put new bubbles in there. They have to go back exactly where they were, and they have to fit your story back in there correctly.
Yeah.
And from a writer's standpoint and editor's standpoint, that's double work for them. So they get double paid. So that's an excruciating and financially costly mistake.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't know that unless you had a good editor who's been through that experience. Editors save you money. Editors also help you come up with the plan. I like to tell my clients that when you hire me, you get publisher level editing, because I feel that even though my time at Comics Experience was short, even though the class with Jim Higgins was only 4 weeks, even though I only spent 6 years in school learning this stuff, one of my teachers was Roland Mann, who did Catwoman back in the day. He owns Silverline Comics now. I feel like I have enough of the pedigree to know, and enough of the information inside the publishing industry and how things work and how marketing works from my experience with Ink Publishing or Ink Studios, that when you hire me, I'm going to give you the information you need to succeed. I'm not going to let you fail. When you do that, you're going to spend nothing, including extra time, looking on TikTok, looking on YouTube. You're not going to spend $15 on going to buy all these different types of books that are going to teach you all this stuff. I can do that for you. It saves you money, which is the biggest thing about having an editor. If you think that $150 a page for 22 pages is expensive, you get what you invest into. If you're not ready to invest in yourself, then maybe this is a medium you don't want to work into, and then you should just turn your stuff into prose, and your only cost for art would be a cover, and then you can just self-publish. You can do that in 30 days when you do prose writing. Prose writing is novella writing, for those that don't know. It's super simple. I did it just a week ago. I published a wildoni themed journal predicated on the philosophy of the three faces. And it has quotes from major legendary samurais and tacticians from the Middle Eastern time period in Japan. And I did that in 2 days, like literally 2 days. I have a proof in my office I got 2 days later. The process is kind of painstaking, self-publishing is, but it teaches you a lot about what the publishing industry goes into. What I don't have from traditional publishing is size, dimension, and what goes into actually taking a book from the file size and giving it to a printer. That's always been like kind of shady to me, because the standard comic book page is constantly changing in independent comics. There is a standard and they have templates, but it's all really about what kind of aesthetic you want to go to. So they focus on style. They help you find a style. They help you find artists. They help you find all your creative talent. They should help you find. They help you through the script process, even if you're only in outlining stage. I helped the gentleman in LA the first year that I got picked up with the comic book company. I helped him outline 6 issues of his comic, and then he went straight to scripts, and we did the first script together. So he knows exactly where his story is going from issue 1 all the way to issue 6. Can't speak about it because it's not published yet, but that level of editing is developmental editing, and that's the most expensive kind, and that's the one you want. If you want just a proofreader to go through your script and fix all the grammatical stuff, they're really only focusing on dialogue, because everything else isn't gonna be seen except for the artist. But if you want them to just proofread it, then that's gonna run you 3 to 5 cents per word. So if you're averaging 200 to 240 words per page, 5 cents times whatever the output of that is, if it's like 20,000, you're looking at $200-300 per book for proofreading, which isn't everybody can afford that. And most times you can work out payment scales. Like I'm gonna do 15 pages, you pay me $150, I'll do the rest of it, and then you finish it, you give them the finished product, they pay you.
Yeah.
I've always had that because I know in independent comics, especially, people are trying to make it to the big leagues. They need those options in order to survive.
Yeah.
Now, I've had some bad experiences where people don't want to pay or people have paid, and they get kind of nasty with you. And I just have that halfway point where, like, if I did the work up till halfway and they pay me halfway, if things turn negative real fast, then I just have a policy where I just, it's cool. I'll stop here, you'll stop there, we'll go our separate ways. And that protects you, that protects them.
Yeah.
You got to know where you're going in comics. If you do not, you'll end up spending a lot of money to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's cheaper than college.
Yeah.
I could have figured out a hundred different ways to spend $97,000.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but but it's not worth it if
Yeah.
you just get a good editor.
Yeah.
And editing it yourself, I mean, it's great, and eventually you'll get good at it, but learning quickly takes time
Yeah.
because you have to have redundancy in what you're looking at. If you don't have redundancy in what you're looking at, then what you're really doing is you're transposing something that you're seeing and you're comparing it to your work, and that's just not fair,
Yeah.
because what you're seeing is something that's finished and has been looked on by eyes who's been in the industry and marinated for 10 years, who
Yeah.
know everything that you don't know, and you're just like, well, that kind of looks like what
Yeah.
that looks like, so yeah, hey, we're good. That's called sitting on a rocket duct taped to a chair, and that's not how you want to treat your project.
Well, I feel like even if you're an editor, like you need other eyes on your work. I think because it's
Yeah.
just that whole like seeing the forest through the trees. Like even think of an analogy, like most of my career has been in fitness, and like even as somebody who's a trainer, when I was training for things competitively, I need trainers for that. Like,
Right.
even if I have the knowledge or the ability, like you need the other pair of eyes on you. You need somebody else that is an expert and a professional to kind of guide you. I think it's it's invaluable. And yeah, a lot of times it's just hard to see the forest through the trees.
It is, and it can be, and that's what good editors will help you. I mean, they get paid to guide you.
Yeah.
That's what they get paid to do.
So I guess we're going to talk a little bit about the strike and some stuff that we almost I think we're going to have to set another time to another chat at some point. So I'd like to talk about your work because you were telling me you've spoken a little bit about your story, and I know you have a Kickstarter coming up. So if you can tell me a little bit about your story, how it came about, what it's about, and about your campaign that's coming up.
Ah, man, wildoni I just created it. It's just out of nowhere. I've always been a fan of Ghost Rider.
Mhm.
It's one of my favorite characters because I'm a huge fan of duality. I think everybody has something in them that isn't them that people don't see, and that's where we internalize all the pain. That's where we internalize all our frustrations. That's where we internalize all of our dreams and desires. That's where we hide ourselves from those. It's where our insecurity leaks from. And the Ghost Rider story is a very vulnerable, emotional story about a man who tried to save his dad and ended up getting screwed by the devil and had to serve him, right? And then he spent a lot of his time in the Marvel Universe before becoming this really cool cosmic character, um, getting back at the devil and doing his part to keep demonic forces at bay because he felt responsible for opening that can of worms. And so the project is called Wildoni. I did a lot of research because one of the biggest things in becoming a comic creator is what kind of story do I want to tell first. And I've always heard this, hey, whatever you put out, that's what people are gonna attribute you to every time they see your name pop up. So I was like, cool. So it's got to be something memorable. And I'm a huge fan of history. History's my thing. And in these day and age, history's been slightly subjective and objective for a lot of people, given the gravity of all the truth dropping on the political landscape. So I was just like, I've always been drawn to samurais, the Bushido code. I was in Taekwondo when I was younger for anger management, as opposed to taking medication, and it really helped calm me down. And so uh, I pulled from my strengths, tragedy. I've always subverted and conquered tragedy, no matter what point in my life I was in, I've conquered it. So I wanted to tell a tragic story. And so I found my character. I found him through research. His name is Morichika. I don't want to butcher his last name. He comes from the Sopao clan, and they had a small resurgence against Toyotomi Hideyoshi on the island of Tsushima. And what drew me to the story was I had just finished playing Ghost of Tsushima. Incredible story. It was emotional. It was engaging. I love the fact that you can explore the entire island. I know they spent quite a long time putting together that game as accurate as they possibly could. So it is a very historical experience for me. And so I thought about it. I'm like, what's interesting about the Japanese culture? Because a lot of their story comes from political oppression and political evolution. I didn't want to tell a story from that because that's just too hard. Not like difficult for the writer, but that's just too hard on people to read. There are lots of tragedy that happened in the evolution of Japan as a country, from beginning all the way to the unification of Tokyo, even before it was Kyoto. Um, and so I took this story and I created my own mythos to it. The beginning of the mythos was an oni and the spirit of fire called the salamander were fighting an ancient battle, and they crashed on this island. And this island was a meteor embedded in this cave. And for centuries, there's been an order of Ronin salamander. Ronins are samurais that get kicked out of whatever family order serving the daimyo, and they become Ronin. They become dismissed. They're dishonored. They can't see their families. They can't live anywhere. They become homeless. That was their version of homeless in ancient Japan. You became Ronin, and that was it. If people talked to you, they also became Ronin. They threw them out. That was how they kept you out of society. And so there was this clandestine group of monks who created this order of salamander, and Ronins flocked to it because it gave them home, it gave them discipline. And it's prefaced on this prophecy that one day the Oni will rise. And it does, because Morichika finds himself in a situation where he's on the brink of death. He gets dropped off in the forest because he failed to take Korea for the shogun, because Japan was going to war with Korea. They wanted South Korea because they wanted to control the Korean Strait for trade, and Japan needed that. What Japan didn't know is that China owned most of Korea, or influenced most of Korea, and that's why they never conquered or pushed into the Korean territory too deep. They ended up getting pushed all the way out. That second time they failed, and that was Morichika's responsibility as one of the generals for his clan, to go in and conquer these small territories to set up base camps. So when they would push forward, they'd have a place to do it from, instead of coming right off the beach like in Normandy and getting shot all the hell or chopped up. And so he failed. So the daimyo basically kills his family, leaves them for dead in the forest, and it just so happens to be near this cave, and he finds the meteor, and he agrees to a whispering voice to release him from his cosmic prison in exchange for the power to enact vengeance. And he becomes, and basically what I pitched this to is Ghost Rider meets the Hulk. He becomes 8.5, 9 foot hulking samurai, like burning samurai with this like meteoric armor, who's capable of raising the dead, who's capable of controlling elements of fire, burning down things. He basically rules his portion of the Kami realm, which, for those of you who don't know, is a realm based in Japanese mythology where a lot of the yokai come from. Yokai is another word for demon. I'm sure anybody who's an anime fan knows what yokai means. But yeah, and that's basically what it is. It's a tragic story about vengeance and family, and he's got to rediscover his honor. One of the covers was colored by Dan Kemp, who does a lot of the coloring for Spawn. Super excited. The cover was drawn by Jeff Muth, and it's actually a prerequisite look into the future of what I call his final form. So right now it's kind of a demonic, out of control form. And when he goes on this journey, he's learning and growing and learning how to control and restrain himself. He doesn't know the power he's unleashed, but he also doesn't know the power that he has control, or the power that he still has, because a number one job of the demon is to convince the person or the soul that they either don't have control, they're inferior, they're insecure, whatever they can to whittle their way into your consciousness and kind of take over. And that's kind of what happens. And so it starts a journey, and the journey is ultimately it's for him to expel the wild Oni spirit completely using the sword of heaven, which is another mythology that I took from Japanese culture. And along the way, we'll meet some Japanese samurai from history. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was one of the last shogun before they went into like a 284-year term of peace, right before the West showed up on what they called black ships. But it's a really cool crossover. I'm gonna have some French pirates in there. There's flintlock pistols and samurai swords. But basically, it's a dark supernatural samurai drama filled with vengeance, action, and carnage. And you can go get notified when it launches right now at inked.pub.
Okay.
Or inked.pub /wildoni. And sign up now. I got 59 followers. I'm hoping to launch at 75, and it's going to be the first issue of probably 8 or 12, if I'm being honest. And I'm not sure if I'll do any more individual issues, so I really feel like this has graphic novel potential. So one of my hopes is that the book is completely done. I've paid for this completely out of pocket. If you want to know how much a real comic costs out of pocket with 6 alternative covers, it was about $5,000.
Okay, yeah, that's I mean, I'm pretty much in the same range, because I did the same thing. Like for my comic is, it's all paid for and done, covers are done, everything, and yeah, pretty much
oh, you have to
that rate. Yeah,
it's a good experience. It's a good experience. It's a way for you to build network.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's amazing, and I think it makes the Kickstarter launch a lot easier, because it's like it's done. I'm just trying to get it out there at this point. It's not, it's not like, all right, pay me so I can now pay other people to do it. Like, it sucks having to shell that money out, but it definitely has the benefit of like, all right, once the campaign's done, if it's successful, like, we're the ball's rolling, we're ready to go.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I've got tears left. That's all I got left to put out is like tears, and I've got some great ones. But if I'm being honest, it's really scary because you don't know how the public's going to react to your work. With a lot of the political landscape and terminology thrown around, like, gender bending and I don't, what do they call that when you steal history from another culture?
Yeah, well, God, how do I not know this? My brain's not functioning right now.
We don't need to spread the
Wow.
negativity, but yeah, like
appropriation, cultural appropriation.
cultural
Yeah.
appropriation. So
Yeah.
I'm slightly concerned, which is why I tend to. This is why while I was conducting the narrative, I don't have any fear because I like totally botched anything within the culture. Like, I feel like I'm respecting the history while also telling a great story. But like, you never know. So once you put it on the internet, man, it's there forever.
Yeah.
So it's been a struggle.
Yeah. Well, I think I've had that issue too, because mine is a Western, but there are like there's a heavy and important kind of Native American presence in the book, and there is that part that's like, okay, I'm a half black, half white guy with no native, background. Is anybody going to look at it and say, hey, what are you doing? So, I think no matter what, you have that. I think at the end of the day, it's like, you're just you're trying to tell a good story. And if you're writing about another culture, if you're doing it honestly, and you're doing it, from, genuinely, then I don't think it matters. And
another point to have a good editor is someone is going to look at it, not just specifically for cultural appropriation, but they might catch something that isn't authentic.
Yeah.
So
no, that's fair.
And especially looking at like I really did research on this. Like, I looked at what the kind of settings would look like. I gave direction towards armor and weapons and kind of hairstyles and styles in general. And I was really genuine in my approach about it. That I haven't been out there, and I know what CG looks like out there on Twitter,
Mhm.
and a lot of it's nasty, and I don't appreciate it, but I also don't acknowledge it. So, but what I'm hoping that this campaign accomplishes is that it helps me finish the project so that I can finally put something out on the market, so that when I finally do apply for a lot of these bigger jobs, because every year I apply for, um the DC usually has at least one assistant editor
Mhm.
position open every year, and then the Disney has the talent search thing,
Yeah.
and then a bunch of these other companies do talent searches as well, and they always have this section in those submission forms where they're like, hey, put a link in here that takes you to something that you published. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I pop in a link because I did a lot of proofreading for uh uh an IP called Shadow's Daughter,
Mhm.
which is actually published through Marcosia, from a good buddy of mine, Morgan Quaid, who runs Super Serious Comics. And it's a great book, but I don't know if that, like, proofreading a comic, like, does that give you much credibility? Who knows? But if you could show that you've done your own project from start to finish, all the way up from concept to production,
Yeah.
then I feel like that gives you a little bit more validation and
Absolutely.
credibility.
Yeah.
So I really hope that is. But that's the project that I'm working on now. I got a bunch of other ones in the pipeline, but this one's ready to go,
Yeah.
and I can't wait till it's good to launch.
And I'll make sure to we'll definitely include links to it. And
Awesome.
now, so two questions before we wrap up. First, I ask everybody this. So we're doing like my, kind of as part of my, this series of interviews, we kind of have our portable whole publishing kind of comic library. So every creator that I talk to, I ask to give me one or two books that we need to add to our library. So if you were to pick one or two books, comics, what should we add to our library here?
Let's see. I'll give you something special, since you probably don't have many people who do interviews next to their bookshelf. Let's see. I think this one is important. And well, I mean, all of them are
Yeah.
important. Yours just
Yeah,
one or
that
two books. I mean, I
yeah,
could.
that's the challenge. It's like, yeah, okay, what are the two
What
books?
are
Yeah.
Okay, the two books I've used the most. One is most recently, and that was, I discovered that. I got another one coming in the mail because I keep finding all these different ones. Marvel even put out one, called it's called Script to Page, and it's got a bunch of scripts in there that you can study. Oh, here it is. So this was called Everything Guide to Writing Graphic Novels. It was written by Mark Ellis and Melissa Martin Ellis.
Okay.
Looks like that. I don't know. It's blocking it out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. That was okay. Got it. Yeah.
That's a little bit, little bit, little
Yeah.
bit. This one only ran me like $12 on
Okay.
Amazon. Really awesome. And this one is the Comics Experience Guide to Writing Comics, Scripting Your Story Ideas from Start to Finish by Andy Schmidt.
Okay.
I really recommend this one, because Andy puts in examples from his own work and on the process. And Andy, I think, is one of my most influential comic professionals. I've listened to almost every episode of his podcast. I did all the way up to 234. It's called The Nuts and Bolts of Making Comics, and great information, everything you need to know on there. But you're really not going to know everything you need to know until you start doing it yourself. These
Yeah.
books give you the knowledge to do it yourself, and they give you a bird's eye look into what you're looking at, especially in the back of these books. They have sections where they talk about the business
Yeah.
and how to succeed, because
And that's huge.
that is huge. Gamal Hannessy, who's a comic book lawyer, is actually about to launch on Kickstarter, um, the comic books business. He's been on panels at San
Yeah. I
Diego
was I
Comic
saw I
Con.
was at one of his panels at New York Comic Con last year.
He's a really good dude. I'm still need to talk to him because he does a lot of legal work for independent comics.
Yeah.
He even partnered with Andy Schmidt, and they started this professional comic book connectors through Comics Experience. It's like $35 a month. I haven't tried it yet, but
Yeah.
Andy had something similar once you finish the class, but it was like $240 for an entire year. But it put you in a chat room with people who are in professional comics professionally and also in independent. So it was an interesting, they were both interesting reads. I'm still going through the graphic novel one because I've written 22 pages. So I know how to construct those now, because writing a graphic novel is different than writing, a 22-page issue where you have to stop the narrative at 22 because it becomes a publishing expense to go over. But those are the two that I recommend the most. I'm crafting a list right now because at my local Writers Guild meeting for Mississippi, I'm going to be giving a presentation on the visual arts and writing of graphic novels. So I'm conducting a list right now of all the books that I've read and all the books that I've seen I've yet to read into like one giant list. And when I get my emailing list to Substack up and running, I hope to offer that as the free giveaway to those to sign up for the email.
Cool. So now where can people find you? I know you have a podcast, so kind of shout out your podcast, social media, anything, anywhere that anyone that's listening to is like this has been a wealth of information. So if anyone wants to hear more from you, where can they find you?
So I got 4 seasons. Notice the change in my voice. My name is Inevitable Mike, and I am the host and podcast premier of Comics N, the letter N, Pop-Tarts. And if you want to be a guest on that, you can hit me up at comics_Pop-Tarts@yahoo.com. But I have four seasons running strong on that show. I've interviewed lots of cool people like Michael Moore, one of the writers of The Punisher, a lot of good wealth of information for people who are looking to get into the industry, as far as from the business side, the art side, and the writing side. And then I also try to pump in my own writing and experience, but also a lot of kind of pop cultural analysis, comparisons, and opinions. So if you like that kind of thing, then I got a group on Facebook. You'll see the big colorful illustrated head surrounded by a Pop-Tart holding Majorn. Really cool, really cool graphic. But it's Comics and the letter N, Pop-Tarts. I'm on Spotify, Amazon, Google, iHeartRadio is our most recent pickup, which I'm super excited about. And then hopefully sometime next year, I'm going to go video, and we're going to have a YouTube channel. We're going to have a Rumble, and I'd like to start making like short reels of all my stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I want to do with that writing is just taking up all my time. It's hard to be a podcaster and a creator at the same time because you got to find time to do this and find time to do that. Man, this is like our third engagement before we finally had the thing, right?
So no, definitely tough,
but yeah, I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter through Comics and Pop-Tarts, and then I'm on Instagram, Michael's Food for Thought. My own Facebook, give my hashtag real quick because I got it pulled up right now, is MJ Florio Comics for Life on Facebook. I don't tend to stay on too much social media because I just got too much going on at one time. I check it before 2:00, because I found out something really cool on social media, especially on Facebook. The algorithms don't log anything after 2:00. So if there's something you're not seeing on someone else's walls because they posted after 2, but if you catch them before 2:00, that's where traffic gets pushed the most.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's man, Facebook and business life. I really hope there's another social media platform that pops up that's got no algorithms in it one day whatsoever, or comes up with a better way to disperse, because cutting you off at so many views and all this, and you have to post for your visibility to be unlocked is, man, it's really hard. It's really hard to be an independent small business press, even in comics, to make money that way, because not everybody's going to see your stuff, and it's kind of not fair.
That's true.
But man, that's where I'm at.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, definitely we gotta set this up again because there's so much we didn't get to touch on, but thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, man. No problem. I come back anytime. I'm available all the time. I do work from home, so I'm usually in my office. That's where you can find me, either watching TV, absorbing things from an analytical monologue of opinions on my own podcast, or waiting for another good conversation. Maybe we can meet together sometime soon so we could talk about the strike.
Definitely. Yeah.
Unless they say, unless I got lots of things to say about AI and the strike.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we definitely should set something up. Well, thank you so much.
No problem, man. You guys have a great night. Listen to this podcast. You heard it first.